The courtroom doors felt heavier than they should have. My hands were shaking as I pushed through, and the first thing I saw was my mother's face. She didn't smile. She didn't nod. She rolled her eyes, leaned over to my father, and whispered something that made him smirk. My older sister, Joyce, sat beside them, her arms crossed, looking at me like I was wasting everyone's time. I stood there for a second, my heart hammering against my ribs, and felt that old, familiar feeling. The one that told me I was too small and too quiet. But this time, something was different. This time, I had something they didn't know about. And when the judge finally looked up from her papers and said my name, everything changed. Before I tell you how I dismantled my entire family in front of a judge, tell me where you're listening from. Drop a comment. And if you've ever been the one nobody believed, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. Because this story is for every person who was told to stay quiet while everyone else got loud. But first, I would like you to grab a cup of coffee as we ride together into this story. Growing up in my house meant learning how to be invisible. Not because I wanted to be, but because there wasn't room for me when Joyce walked into a room. 3 years older, louder and prettier, she had the kind of presence that made people turn their heads. My parents loved that about her. They loved how she commanded attention, how she never second-guessed herself, how she could walk into any situation and make it hers. I was the opposite. Quiet and careful, the kind of kid who did her homework at the kitchen table while everyone else laughed in the living room. Teachers called me shy. My parents called me difficult. Joyce called me boring. And after a while, I started to believe them. When I was 12, my grandmother passed away. Her name was Lorraine, and she lived in a small house on the edge of town, the kind with a garden that smelled like jasmine and rooms that always felt warm even in winter. She was the only person who ever looked at me like I was someone worth knowing. She'd ask me questions, real ones, not the kind adults ask just to fill silence. What do you think about that? What would you do? She listened when I answered. The day of her funeral, I wore a black dress that was too big for me. Joyce wore heels and a blazer, looking like she'd stepped out of a magazine. At the reception, people kept pulling her aside, telling her how grown-up she looked, how sorry they were for her loss. Nobody said anything to me. I stood by the window, holding a paper plate with food I couldn't eat, watching my family move through the crowd like I wasn't even there. A week later, my parents sat us down in the living room. My father cleared his throat, the way he always did before saying something he thought was important. "Your grandmother left some things behind," he said. "We need to figure out what to do with the house." Joyce leaned forward immediately. "Can I have it?" My mother laughed, not unkindly, but in that way that made it clear the answer was already decided. "Sweetheart, you're still in school, but when you're ready, we'll talk about it." I didn't say anything. I'd learned by then that speaking up only made things worse. My father glanced at me once, then looked away, like I was a piece of furniture he'd forgotten was there. For the next 6 years, my grandmother's house sat empty. My parents paid the property taxes, kept the lawn mowed, but nobody lived there. Joyce went to college, then moved into an apartment downtown with her boyfriend. She talked about the house sometimes, how she'd renovate it, flip it, and turn it into something modern. My parents nodded along, proud, like she'd already done it. I went to community college. I worked part-time at a grocery store, saved every dollar I could, and lived in a studio apartment with walls so thin I could hear my neighbor's TV through the floor. I didn't complain or ask for help. I just kept my head down and survived. Then, 2 months ago, everything shifted. I got a letter in the mail, official-looking with a law firm's name in the corner. I almost threw it away, thinking it was spam, but something made me open it. Inside was a single page, typed, formal, and at the bottom, a sentence that made my hands go numb. As per the last will and testament of Lorraine Hayes, the property located at 42 Maple Street is to be transferred to the sole ownership of Brooke Hayes, effective immediately upon the resolution of probate. I read it 3 times. My grandmother had left me the house, not my parents or Joyce. I sat on the edge of my bed, the letter trembling in my hands, and felt something crack open inside my chest. Not joy, not yet, just disbelief. And underneath that, a small, fierce flicker of something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. The next morning, I called the law firm. The woman on the other end was patient, walking me through the process. Probate, she explained, was almost complete. There had been a delay because my parents had contested the will. They claimed my grandmother wasn't in her right mind when she wrote it, that I had manipulated her and the house should go to them as her primary heirs. But the will is clear, the lawyer said, and your grandmother had a notarized letter attached explaining her decision. The judge will review everything at the hearing next week. I hung up and sat in the silence of my apartment. My parents had contested it. Of course they had. They couldn't stand the idea of me having something they wanted. Something Joyce wanted. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I felt angry. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's face, heard my father's voice, felt the weight of every time they dismissed me, ignored me, and made me feel like I didn't matter. I didn't tell them I knew about the hearing. I didn't call, didn't text. I just waited. 3 days before the court date, my mother called me. Her voice was sweet, the tone she used when she wanted something. "Brooke, sweetheart, we need to talk." I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch, imagining her sitting in the living room, tapping her nails against the armrest. "About what?" I finally said. "About your grandmother's house. There's been some confusion with the will and we're trying to sort it out. But I wanted to reach out to you first before things get messy." Messy, like I was the problem. "What kind of confusion?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Well, your grandmother was very old when she wrote that will. We're just making sure everything was done properly. You understand, right? We don't want anyone taking advantage." Taking advantage? As if I'd tricked an old woman into leaving me her house. "I didn't do anything wrong," I said quietly. "Of course not, honey. Nobody's saying that. But you have to understand, your sister has been planning for this house for years. She has ideas and plans. It would just make more sense for it to go to her. You're still young. You have time to build something of your own." There it was, the same script they'd been reading my whole life. "Joyce deserves it, you don't." "I have to go," I said, and hung up before she could respond. That night, I pulled out every document the lawyer had sent me. The will, the notarized letter, the property deed. I read my grandmother's letter over and over, her handwriting shaky but clear. "To my granddaughter, Bertska, you were always the one who listened, the one who saw me, not just what I could give. This house is yours because I know you'll fill it with the kind of life I always wanted for you. Don't let them take this from you. You are enough." I cried, not sad tears, but the kind that comes when you've been holding your breath for so long you forgot what air felt like. The day before the hearing, Joyce called. "Mom told me you're being difficult about the house," she said, no greeting or warmth. "I'm not being difficult. Grandma left it to me. Because she was confused. She barely knew what day it was half the time." "That's not true." "Bertska, don't be selfish. You know I've been planning this. You know how much work I've put into designing the renovations. Just let it go." "No." The word felt foreign in my mouth. I'd never said no to Joyce, not once. "What?" "I said no, the house is mine. Grandma wanted me to have it." There was a long pause, then her voice dropped, cold and sharp. "You're going to regret this." She hung up. I stared at my phone, my heart pounding. Part of me wanted to call her back and apologize to make it easier. But another part of me, the part that had been silent for so long, refused. The morning of the hearing, I woke up before dawn. I put on the only professional outfit I owned, a gray blazer and black pants I'd bought at a thrift store. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the person staring back. Not because I looked different, but because for the first time I looked like I belonged somewhere. I drove to the courthouse alone. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. When I walked through those heavy doors and saw my family sitting together, united against me, I almost turned around. Almost. But then I remembered my grandmother's letter. "You are enough." I sat down on the opposite side of the courtroom. My mother glanced at me, rolled her eyes, and whispered to my father. Joyce didn't even look. The message was clear. I was wasting their time. The judge entered, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. She sat, adjusted her glasses, and looked at the documents in front of her. "This is the matter of the estate of Lorraine Hayes," she said. "I've reviewed the will, the contest filed by the family, and the accompanying letter from the deceased. Before I make my ruling, I'd like to hear from both parties." My father stood first. He was good at this, speaking in public, sounding reasonable. He explained how my grandmother had been declining, how I'd visited her more often in her final years, how they worried I'd influenced her decision. "We just want what's fair," he said, "and we believe the house should go to our oldest daughter who has the means and the plans to honor Lorraine's memory." The judge nodded, made a note, then looked at me. "Miss Hayes, would you like to respond?" I stood. My legs felt weak. My voice, when it came out, was barely a whisper. "I didn't manipulate my grandmother. I just visited her and I listened to her. That's all." The judge leaned forward slightly. Can you elaborate? I took a breath. My whole life I've been told I'm not enough, not smart enough, not interesting enough, not important enough. My grandmother was the only person who made me feel like I mattered. She left me the house because she knew I'd take care of it, because she knew I'd remember her. My voice cracked. I felt my mother shift in her seat and heard Joyce sigh. The judge studied me for a long moment. Then she looked at my family. I've read Mrs. Hayes's letter. She was very clear about her intentions. She expressed concern that her house would be sold or renovated beyond recognition. She wanted it to go to someone who would preserve it, who valued it for what it was, not what it could become. My father started to speak, but the judge held up a hand. The will is valid. The letter is notarized. And based on the evidence, I see no indication of undue influence. The house belongs to Bertzka Hayes. The room went silent. I felt the words settle over me, heavy and real. The house was mine. My mother stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. She's barely an adult. The decision is final, the judge said firmly. Court is adjourned. I walked out of that courtroom in a daze. My family didn't follow me. They stood in a tight cluster, whispering furiously, shooting looks in my direction. I didn't care. I got in my car, drove to my apartment, and sat in silence. I'd won. But the story didn't end there. 2 weeks later, I drove to my grandmother's house. I hadn't been there since the funeral. When I pulled into the driveway, the jasmine was overgrown. The paint was peeling, but it still felt like her. I unlocked the door with the key the lawyer had given me and stepped inside. The air smelled stale, but underneath it, I caught the faint scent of lavender, her scent. I walked through the room slowly, running my fingers over the furniture, the walls, the windowsills. Everything was exactly as she'd left it. In her bedroom, I found a box on the closet shelf. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to me. Letters she'd written but never sent. I sat on the floor and read every one. One, dated 3 years before she died, stopped me cold. Bertzka, I know your parents don't see you the way I do. I know Joyce takes up all the air in the room. But you, my sweet girl, you are the one who will build something real, something lasting. Don't let them convince you otherwise. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the box. Then I stood, looked around the house, and made a decision. I wasn't going to sell it. I wasn't going to renovate it into something unrecognizable. I was going to live here. The next day, I gave notice at my apartment. I packed everything I owned into my car, which wasn't much, and moved into my grandmother's house. I cleaned, repaired what I could, and slowly the house came back to life. My parents didn't call. Joyce didn't text. For the first time in my life, I existed in a space where nobody was telling me I wasn't enough. Then, a month after I moved in, I got a call from a real estate agent. Miss Hayes, I'm calling on behalf of the Murasun family. They've made an offer on your property. I frowned. I'm not selling. The offer is quite generous, $200,000. My heart skipped. That was more than double what the house was worth. Who are the Murasuns? I'm not at liberty to say, but they're very interested. They asked me to tell you this is a limited-time offer. I hung up. An hour later, my mother called. Bertzka, I heard you got an offer on the house. How did you? Just listen. $200,000 is a lot of money. You could do so much with that. Pay off debt, go back to school, travel, don't be stupid. I'm not selling. Bertzka, I said no. I hung up. My hands were shaking. The calls kept coming. Different agents, different offers, all suspiciously high. And then one evening, Joyce showed up at my door. She looked the same. Perfect hair, perfect outfit, and perfect smile, but her eyes were cold. Can I come in? I didn't move. What do you want? I want to talk, please. Against my better judgment, I let her in. She walked through the house slowly, her gaze lingering on every detail, every unchanged piece of furniture. You kept it exactly the same, she said. That's what Grandma wanted. She turned to me. Bertzka, I'm going to be honest with you. I need this house. For what? I'm getting married. My fiancé and I want to flip properties. This would be our first project. We have investors lined up, plans drawn up, but we need this house. It's not for sale. I'll give you $300,000. I stared at her. You don't have that kind of money. I will once we flip this place, but I need you to sign it over first. We can work out a payment plan. No, her expression hardened. You're being selfish. I'm keeping what's mine. It should have been mine. She snapped, her voice rising. Grandma barely knew what she was doing. She was old and confused. You manipulated her. That's not true. Then why did she give it to you? She demanded. What did you do? What did you say to her? I listened, I said quietly. That's all, I just listened. Joyce laughed, sharp and bitter. That's pathetic. Maybe, but it was enough for her. She stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked to the door. Before she left, she looked back. "You're going to regret this." The door slammed behind her. I stood in the empty living room, my heart racing. For the first time, I realized something. They weren't going to stop. They were going to keep pushing, keep demanding, keep trying to take what was mine. But I wasn't the same person I used to be. I wasn't the girl who stayed quiet, who bent, who disappeared. I was done. 3 months passed. I settled into the house, made it mine. I painted the kitchen, fixed the fence, and planted new flowers in the garden. Every night I sat on the porch and watched the sun set, and for the first time in my life I felt peace. Then one Saturday morning I woke up to the sound of trucks. I looked out the window and froze. There were 3 construction trucks parked in front of my house. Men in hard hats were unloading equipment, setting up barriers, talking on walkie-talkies. Ran outside. "What are you doing?" One of the men, older with a clipboard, looked up. "We're here to start the demo." "Demo? What are you talking about?" "Demolition. We're tearing down the house." My blood went cold. "Who hired you?" He checked his clipboard. "Murasun Development LLC. Murasun, the same name from the real estate calls. "You can't do this. This is my house." He frowned. "We have a signed contract. The property was sold 2 weeks ago." "That's impossible. I didn't sell it." He handed me a paper. I scanned it quickly, my hands shaking. At the bottom was a signature, my signature, except it wasn't. I grabbed my phone and called the lawyer who handled my grandmother's estate. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Someone forged my signature," I said, my voice shaking. "They're trying to tear down my house." "Stay there, I'm calling the police." 20 minutes later, 2 police officers arrived. I showed them the forged document, explained everything. They made calls, took statements, and by noon the construction crew was gone. But I knew who was behind it. I knew. That evening I drove to my parents' house. I didn't knock, I just walked in. They were in the living room, Joyce sitting on the couch, my mother pouring wine. They all looked up when I entered. "Britska," my mother said, surprised. "What are you? You tried to steal my house." The room went silent. My father stood. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Murasun Development. That's Joyce's fiance's company. You forged my signature, sold the house, and tried to demolish it before I found out." Joyce stood too, her face pale. "You can't prove that." "I don't have to. The police are investigating. They have handwriting experts. And when they trace the sale back to you, it's fraud. That's jail time." My mother's hand trembled, the wine glass shaking. "We were trying to help you. You don't know what you're doing with that house." "Help me," I laughed, cold and sharp. "You tried to take the one thing Grandma left me, the one thing that was mine." "It should have been ours," Joyce said, her voice rising. "We're her family too." "Then why didn't she leave it to you?" The question hung in the air. Nobody answered. "She left it to me," I said, my voice steady, "because she knew you'd do this. She knew you'd try to take it, twist it, make it yours. That's why she wrote that letter. That's why she made sure the will was ironclad." My father sank back into his chair. My mother looked away. Joyce stared at me, her jaw tight. "You're all the same," I said quietly. "You take and take and take, and you never stop to think about who you're hurting. Well, I'm done. I'm keeping the house. And if you ever come near me or my property again, I'll file charges." I turned and walked out. Behind me, I heard my mother start to cry. I didn't stop. I drove back to my grandmother's house, parked in the driveway, and sat in the silence. My hands were shaking and my heart was pounding. But underneath all of it, I felt something I'd never felt before. Freedom. 2 weeks later, the police called. They'd traced the forged documents back to Joyce's fiancé. He confessed, claimed it was a business mistake, and tried to blame an assistant. But the evidence was clear. He'd forged my signature with Joyce's knowledge. They offered me a settlement. A public apology, a payout, the whole thing swept under the rug if I agreed not to press charges. I thought about it for a long time. Part of me wanted to see them punished, to watch them face consequences for once in their lives. But another part of me, the part that sounded like my grandmother, whispered something else. "Let it go. You already won." So I took the settlement. I used the money to fully restore the house, to make it everything my grandmother had dreamed it could be. I quit my job at the grocery store and started freelancing as a writer, working from the sunroom where she used to sit and read. My family never apologized. They never called, never reached out. And I was okay with that, because I didn't need them anymore. I had a home. I had peace. I had the life my grandmother had wanted for me. And every night when I sat on that porch and watched the sun set, I felt her there. Not in some mystical, spiritual way. Just in the way the house smelled, the way the light fell through the windows, the way the jasmine bloomed every spring. She'd given me more than a house. She'd given me permission to exist, to take up space, to believe I was enough, and I was. If this story hits you, if you've ever been the one nobody believed in, drop a comment and tell me where you're from. And if you want more stories about people who refuse to stay small, hit that subscribe button, because the next one's going to be even better. Thank you for listening. See you in the next one.